Welcome to the CFO Track podcast, where we inspire and educate future finance leaders to help them stay on track to CFO. I'm your host, Tom Hunter, and every week I'll be bringing you stories from some of Australia's best and brightest CFOs and the lessons they learnt along the way. My goal for the podcast is to provide learning and development opportunities for those wanting to get to the level of the guests on this show, but they just didn't have the access to those lessons otherwise. Let's get into it. On the show this week, I'm joined by Sarah Petty. Sarah is the founder of CFO advisory business, Audit Business Partners. This is after spending the first 15 years of her corporate career with some of the world's biggest FMCG and retail brands. The fractional and virtual CFO advisory space is hugely popular and fast growing, and Sarah talks through the challenges and the positives of getting into this market. So if you've ever considered getting into the fractional CFO space, this is an episode you're really going to enjoy. So here we go. Sarah Petty, welcome to the CFO podcast.
Thank you, Tom. How exciting to be here.
Absolutely. How's the week been? How are you going?
Very good. Busy as always. We have a few client wins this week, which was awesome to see. And a few potential new client calls as well. So all happening in the business.
Very good. Very good. Well, I've given you a little bit of an intro, but for those listening, it'd be good to get an outline of who you are, what you do, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sarah Petty. I'm the founder and owner of Audit Business Partners, and we are a virtual CFO firm. And so what we do is we're the CFO for a number of small and mid-tier businesses. It's myself and a couple of CFO team members, but we work with our clients on a part-time basis. So we are really helping with all of that strategic finance work that a CFO would do in any big business, helping a business understand what their goals are, and then forecasting, budgeting, and developing plans to work towards what that growth goal might be. So it could be to double, triple the business in a few years. It could be to expand into a new market, perhaps sell the business down the track, acquire a new business, whatever that might be. We will help business owners work out what's the financial decisions that they need to make to get to achieve that goal, at what time, do they require funding to get there, and making sure that as they grow, that their business is sustainable and they have cash available to invest in that growth. So that's what I do. I've prior to that had a near 20-year career in corporates, various finance roles in ASX listed businesses and global conglomerates, and worked my way up into a CFO role before I decided to start my own business and do this working with smaller business owners. And I love what I do, being able to bring that experience from my corporate days to smaller businesses who really need that expertise and insight. But now, I work directly with the founders and them grow their business.
Yeah, cool. Good summary. And how does it feel to be on the other side of the podcast? Because for the listeners, Sarah does run her own called Audit Insights. I think you're about 35-ish episodes in now. Is that right?
Yeah, we are. Probably 30 something episodes in. I don't know. It's good not having to organize it, but it's a bit more when you have to answer the questions. So we'll see how we go.
Yeah, nice. Well, I'm sure you do great. So the reason for the pod is about giving future CFOs and up-and-coming CFOs learning pathways or that they might not have access to otherwise. So it'd be good to get an understanding of what got you into accounting, why finance, all that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, when I was at high school and working out what I wanted to do with my career going forwards, I had absolutely no idea. No one in my family works in accounting or finance. So it wasn't like a family career path that I followed or anything like that. I always had an interest in, in business and numbers and just that ability to problem solve. But I actually love the arts as well. So I love writing and theatre, and I really had no idea where I wanted to go. And I ended up doing a degree in arts and a double degree in arts and commerce. So I could kind of cover both sides. Very, very generalist. And as I worked through my degree, I did a major in finance. And then when I was finishing university, started looking for roles in that area. I actually got fired from my first job before I started it. So I had applied for a graduate role with one of the ASX listed businesses while I was still studying. And when I came to finish my degree, as I now see that happens in corporates, the business had gone through a restructure and decided that they had to cut their graduate program. So I was told that I no longer had a job.
How long into it was it, or how far before?
I think I was finishing my final exams and I was meant to start the following year, like in January of the following
Okay, so a
year.
few months in advance at
A
least.
few months in advance. But for a lot of those graduate programs, you're applying
Stressful.
6 months before.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not they're rarely last minute. So I was stressing out, thought my finance career was over before it had even started.
Yeah.
When you look back at these things in hindsight, I was blessing in disguise. And I went overseas with a friend of mine and thought I'll just go take some time out and then come back and deal with all of this. And while I was away, I got contacted by a recruiter who was aware that this had happened and they were looking to fill in their program at GE, financial management program at GE. And at the time, GE was one of the biggest global conglomerates in the world, one of the biggest companies, US owned, with a number of various business units from finance to healthcare to aviation, electrical, all kinds of things. And so they said, would I be interested in recruiting for them? I said, yes, I am, but I'm overseas. So I think I literally flew back one day, turned up at the interview, jet lagged the second day.
No video interviewing back then?
Sorry,
No video interviews back then?
no video interviews. Turn up in person, unfortunately. Guy interviewing me. Yes, I went through the interview process and I got a role with them. Yeah, in hindsight, GE was an amazing place to start. They really invest in their graduates and, it was a 2-year rotational program where you did 6 monthly rotations through their different business units across Melbourne
Yeah.
and Sydney.
Yeah.
As well as formal training. I had exams to pass as part of that internally with GE.
Yeah. Do you use CA or CPA?
No, it's their internal training.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yep. But yeah, some amazing leaders and, global leaders. I got exposure to all, aspects of the business. I got to travel as part of that, even on the graduate program.
Awesome.
So yeah, amazing experience. And then I did get a redundancy payment from the previous company, even though I never worked a day with them. So I
How much you
thought
get?
rolling in money by that stage.
Yeah. On the graduate programs, I'm always curious because like most people think that you have to go to Big Four, or you have to go to an accounting firm or whatever for that training. How do you feel that was compared to the Big Four route?
Yeah, so interestingly, I did not apply for one of the big four. I just felt it wasn't the fit for me and I wanted to go into industry. There are lots of companies that do it. Often their
Yeah,
intake
for
is
sure.
not as big as the big four. The big four do take a lot. And I'll be
Mm,
honest, I'm not as familiar with the graduate programs these days, but I do know talking to students and graduates, there are lots of options out there. And many of the companies I've worked with have taken at least a few graduates a year to build their pipeline of talent. So there are other options out there if the big four isn't what you want to do.
yeah, for sure. And you might know a little bit more about this than I would, but in terms of how that's promoted for uni students, do you think that it is a bit of a missed opportunity there for businesses for promoting graduate programs versus accounting firms?
Yeah, potentially. Some do it better than others.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is just a bit word of mouth, and some they only have 2 or 3 spots, and
Mm,
just through word of mouth, they're filling it. So they're not really actively getting out to, O Week and career
sure.
fairs and things like that.
Yeah.
So it is a bit of asking around. I mean, the good thing nowadays is you can follow those companies on social media or check out their websites, and often they're posting about it when it comes to vacation time. So I'd be doing that if you're a graduate
Yeah.
looking for those type of opportunities. Back in my day, it makes me sound old, but that wasn't really social media wasn't a thing, right? So
Yeah.
you just had to ask
On
around, talk
MySpace,
to
maybe.
recruiters, yeah, kind of just use your network to work out where the opportunities are. And not to say that still works. That still works. Building your network is often where opportunities come from. I'm sure you would know, Tom.
Mm,
But yeah, I would suggest just following companies that you might be interested in and whether they have a program or not. Just being what's happening in their business, and they usually do post it.
yeah, cool. And then so you moved on with GE, and then you've had a pretty significant career within consumer products and FMCG and all that. So and then you moved to Mondelez, was that right?
Yeah, so I did the graduate program with GE. I took a role then post the graduate program in their
Yeah.
FP&A analyst in the commercial finance business as it was at the time. So it was financing, all types of business financing, equipment financing, lease financing, that type of thing. I learnt heaps in that role, but I found financial services wasn't really for me. So I was doing the role in Sydney, and I'm a Melbourne girl, so I wanted to move back home to Melbourne after some time. And I won't get into the Melbourne Sydney debate with you. You've done both too.
No, that's all right. It's horses for courses type thing.
Yeah.
That's all
Yeah.
good.
But yeah, I was ready to move back home and I was looking for other options. So I got a job with what was Cadbury at the time. So they were
Mm.
a standalone company, UK owned at the time, and joined there as a finance analyst in the procurement team. And I spent a couple of years there. Now, they went through a bit of a transition while I was there. Kraft Foods took them over, which is a US company. And then
Mm.
they split and merged and became Mondelez eventually at some point. So I moved my way up through commercial finance there into a finance manager role in sales finance. And then after some time, I was sort of ready to move on to something new. And I moved across to Lion, which was another big FMCG company in the dairy drinks space. I spent a little bit of time at Lion before my partner at the time, who's now my husband, got a opportunity to move overseas with his company and to move to Singapore. So we decided to go, and
Was that a
I
big decision?
yeah, of course, it's always a big decision
Yeah.
when looking to make that move, right? But I guess at that point we had, no kids,
Yeah.
no
Great
mortgage.
time to do it.
It was a bit easier, and people still do it, with kids and having a house and all kinds of things you can. But yeah, we talked about it. We both wanted to do something like that to get that
Mm.
experience. And Singapore was a great opportunity. I did have some contacts there from people I'd previously worked with. So
Helps.
luckily for me, I was able to line up work quite quickly. And so we both moved over there and lived there for about nearly 3 years. And I was working for Kellogg's company over there. So another FMCG company.
Yeah. So on that FMCG stuff, how have you, because it's such a dynamic industry and there's so many nuances that you won't get in other industries, so the margins, all that kind of thing. Do you think that shaped your career much at all, that specific element?
Yes, for sure. And it's different between each of the businesses, right? If you think about
Mm.
Mondelez, the core of, I know they have a range of products, but the core of what they're doing is making chocolate. Now, chocolate is a shelf stable product that has, a relatively decent shelf life on it.
Mm.
But it's an impulse buy. So promotions are huge in chocolate. I'm sure we all see it, half price chocolate. You kind of are tempted by it. You'll chuck one into the trolley at the supermarket or grab it at the service station. So it's
Yeah,
quite an
yeah.
impulse buy. So, looking at promotion planning and pricing, that's taken heavily into account, and it's very volume driven through those promos. Whereas then I moved to Lion, being a dairy company. Dairy products, fresh dairy products, have very short shelf life. For the fresh white milk, that's turning around in a couple of
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be driven by promotion. People won't buy 4 liters of milk instead of 2 because it's on promotion. So it's a completely different dynamic. So pricing and, back in those days was when we were still buying milk at $1 a litre. And so you've got
Mm.
any skinny margins on this, if any, in some cases. So it's a completely different product type and dynamic in the business. And then Kellogg's is different again. There I was working on what we called emerging markets, which is I looked after, we were the Asia head office in Singapore, and I looked after all of Southeast Asia, India, China, and Africa fell into that portfolio as
Yeah.
well. So often these were new products going out into those developing countries, but there the price point had to be very low because they're not wealthy countries. And so it had to be product that could be bought for, 1 or 2 coins or depending on what the currency was. Again, a different pricing strategy, a different approach. So yes, it is all FMCG, but it's very different in the margin structure, the pricing, all of that, depending on the product and the consumers that you're ultimately selling to.
Yeah, okay. Go. So you went to Singapore. So how was that? Like, what was the experience like? Culture, fit, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought going to Singapore, it's a well-developed country. It's very safe. Most people speak English there, which made it easier from a language
Yeah.
perspective. So I kind of naively thought it would be very similar. But when I got there, it was more of a culture shock than I expected. And I guess the reason being is that there are a lot of expats in Singapore from all
Mm,
over the world. So other parts of
yeah.
Asia, Europe, US. So you've got this real mishmash of cultures. So my office was probably 50% Singaporeans and 50% expats. So there's all kinds of cultures that you're dealing with. And then, as I mentioned, I was looking after um, a portfolio of countries, in the emerging markets. So I was dealing with their finance and sales teams based in those countries. So again,
Mm,
you've got language barriers, cultural differences, all of that you've got to be conscious of. And so I probably walked into it thinking a bit, oh, I know what I'm doing. It's going to be very similar to Australia, but obviously market dynamics are very different in those countries. And in Australia, we've got that duopoly between Coles and Woolworths, which is very unique to Australia, and particularly emerging markets where that big retail isn't a big part of the market. It's all the small street vendors. So completely different approach to what I was used to. And then just learning the nuances in each of the cultures. And I enjoyed that part of it. Once I kind of found my feet, I made some great friends with my coworkers who were from all over the world, Singapore, India, Korea, Japan, all kinds of places. But you do have it kind of, I guess, makes you a bit humble, realizing that, we don't know everything in Australia. There's
yeah.
much more out there. And, funny things like just sayings that I thought were universal.
Yeah.
They're not. They're only in Australia, and lots of people did
Yeah.
not understand what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So we had a few laughs about that at times. But
The
yeah,
reporting the reporting standards would be interesting too, because you're reporting in all the is it local gap for each of those countries, or was it more centralized?
so because Kellogg's is a US company, still falling under
Okay.
US GAAP, but
Yeah.
there are still, some nuances to each of the countries. Now, I wasn't dealing with the statutory side from the accounting perspective. I was more the commercial finance, but there still are nuances depending on
Mm,
country. And I mean, Africa was probably the biggest challenge in that I've never even been to Africa. And I would get a call from one of their business development managers saying, we want to launch this product into Tanzania, and help me with a pricing structure and what the margins look like. And I'm literally Googling, where is Tanzania? What's the country? What's the currency?
yeah.
It's just completely new, but you've just got to be problem solving and using the skills that you have for a completely new market, but also not just making assumptions. So I had to lean heavily on their sales team to say, okay, help me understand. Tell me about the market. Tell me about the customers. Where's this going to be sold? You really have to be curious, not just make assumptions and assume it's the same as, other countries that you've worked with.
Yeah. And how did you go from a stakeholder management perspective? Because some countries are really direct and straight to the point, whereas others are a little bit more, you've got to work into the conversation and much more formal. So how did you have any challenges there?
Oh, yes, definitely. Um,
Yeah.
and and I didn't realize, but people said, found Australians to be very direct. And, I've probably found other cultures to be very direct. So I didn't think I was overly direct. But our approach is to be quite upfront and just tell it like it is, right? You're right. That's not the case in other countries. And it's not right or wrong. It's just how that culture works. And so sometimes in some cultures, it needs to go up through a hierarchy before a decision can be made. Or might tell you yes, but they really need to work things out in the background. So a yes might not be a yes. And, there's those kind of nuances. So I had one instance where I had contacted a colleague in another country, and there was some sort of report that she needed to write for me. And she said, I'll get this done by Friday. And I had written back, no problem. Um, Fine, didn't hear from her. And then a few days later, my leader pulled me into his office and said, what did you say to that finance analyst? And I said, I'm not sure. Like, what are you talking about? We agreed on this report date. And he said, you've told them that there's a problem with the report. I said, I didn't say that. This is what I said. Anyway, we finally worked out that they took it as not, no problem, no worries, but more like, no, there's a problem. She had raised it up with her leader, who then raised it with my leader. And then we worked out, the miscommunication.
Yeah.
But it's
Did you
just,
get to speak to them directly, or did it end up just going through the chain?
Look, I didn't raise it with her because again,
Yeah,
that sort of to do that in the culture is probably
sure.
a bit
Yeah,
confronting. My leader managed it and told them the reason and the messaging and
yeah.
maybe just said, she's a crazy Australian. I don't take it personally. But once I understood that and they probably understood me a little bit, our relationship was better anyway.
That's good. Yeah, positives then. So how long were you in Singapore for?
Just under 3 years.
Yeah. Enjoyed it? Worth it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, great experience. And not just from the work perspective, but, the proximity to the rest of Asia and being able to travel
Mm.
around and go to Thailand for a weekend. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, cool. And how was it returning back? Because I had a similar experience myself after spending some time in London. It's both socially and professionally. You come back and it is a life changing experience, right? Because you're learning so many things and you change, and then you come back and either your friendship circles have slightly changed or they haven't, and you've changed, and so that's slightly difficult. And then the professional side of things, it's this weird dynamic where international experience isn't as regarded in the way that it should be in Australia, because Australia can be a little bit behind with certain components. So it'd be good to understand from a professional and social, how did you find it coming back?
Yeah, it is a change, I guess. And you're right. It actually, I think it grew me from a professional and personal
Mm.
perspective.
Yep.
But because we're so isolated here in Australia, it's not everyone's doing that. And it is a
Mm.
big deal to move away because you're not just, in Europe moving to the next country, you could still, get on a train for an hour and visit your family. But
Yeah.
here, it's a big deal to move to another country. We're not close to other countries in Australia. So, yeah, I mean, I found coming back after 3 years, things had changed, but not, I have heard of, when people have spent 10 years away and then coming back, it's actually a very significant adjustment. I found from a professional perspective, I found it accelerated my career because I had this new perspective and it had really opened my eyes to what else is out there. It just helped me, especially from a leadership perspective. I was a better leader coming back from having that experience. And I think from a personal perspective, again, you've experienced new things, you've done lots of travel, you've had to problem solve in a country where, things just do work differently. The systems are different than what they're in Australia. And some aspects are better and some aspects are not. And you just have to get used to that. So yeah, coming back and you've got friends who haven't been through that experience, it can be hard to understand. But, lots of my good friends, things hadn't changed. And it felt like you've got those friends where, you've known them for years and we've all come and gone in different directions and you come back and it's exactly the same. And then there's others who, maybe you just have moved in different directions and whether that's,
Life, right?
sometimes for the best, it's just, you have a friendship for a season and that's it.
Yeah.
And I mean, also out of that, I had some really good friends in Singapore who I still keep in contact with. And last year when I went back for a holiday, I caught up
Yeah.
with one of them who we kept in contact. We haven't seen each other, it's nearly 10 years since I was in Singapore now. We stayed in contact all that time. And when I met up with her, it was like nothing had changed. We could have spent hours talking. It was great to catch up with her when I was there. So I think it's just there are lots of wins out of it. There's obviously the challenges, but anytime that you push yourself out of your comfort zone to do something differently like that, you can't help but grow. And yeah, I think I was ready to come home by the end of 3 years. I wanted to come back to Melbourne, but I'm so glad I had that experience. It's really helped me develop for the better.
Yeah, great. And so you came back to Lion as well when you came back?
Yes. So I wasn't necessarily planning to. So when I left Lion, and this is a bit of a lesson in the good versus bad leadership, but when I left Lion, I talked to the CFO at the time and told her about this opportunity had come up for my partner. We were thinking about going. And instead of feeling, getting her back up and saying, all right, well, you haven't been at Lion all that long. See you later. Good luck with it all. She was so supportive and said, this is a great opportunity. Yes, go do it. These opportunities only come around once in a lifetime. And if and when you come back and you're ready and you want to discuss if we've got opportunities, I'd be more than happy to talk to you again. And so leaving Lion that first time was such a positive experience, which is different to some businesses that I've left. But she
Mm.
left the door open and was so supportive of that. that when I came back, I did give her a call, and yeah, it worked out. We managed to line up a role for me to come back to Lion, and I spent the next 4 or 5 years with Lion. Yeah, yeah. So, there are some businesses where you leave and they really take it personally and say, well, you're leaving, you're never allowed back. And I just think it's the wrong thing to do. You support someone with their career and whatever their life choices are, because we never know someone's full situation from a personal perspective, what their goals are. If you're supportive of
Yeah.
that, you never know, you
There
might
is a
get
long
a
time, right? You just never know when you're gonna cross paths again or in the future or just any interaction. So do you think
yeah,
that that experience with that manager has shaped your own approach to managing? Yeah.
because the way she made me feel as though I was making the right decision. And even if it wasn't the right decision, I had the support and just go try it, versus how some managers had made me feel just, awful and down on myself about leaving, and as though, maybe I'm really making a wrong decision. It's absolutely been in the back of my mind as team members in my own team have made decisions about new roles, leaving a company, trying something new. So yeah, it really made a difference, and I was loyal to her and the company, and came back because it was such a positive experience.
Yeah, perfect. And then so you ended up wrapping up there and you went to Target, I think, from memory?
Yeah, so Lion went through some changes where Bega bought out the business.
Okay. Yep.
My role was made redundant through that, and I decided it was time to move on to something else. So I went from there. I joined Target, which was going through a bit of change at the time and a new strategy. I went into Target was an interesting way in that I got the role. I had reached out to some recruiters in my network saying that I was looking for potential new role. And one of them put me in contact with the GM of finance at Target and said he hasn't got a role at the moment, but he's looking for a bit of restructure in his team. He's keen to talk to you just to understand your skill set. So we had a very general kind of conversation, and told him a bit about my experience, what I was looking for. He was telling me about, the team and what he was thinking for it. And sort of between the two of us, we discussed, could there be a way that we could make this work and make a role that fitted? And so as he was then working through his team structure, he came back to me with something that probably wasn't in his initial plan, but because he knew my skill set and the team skill set, he could sort of give me a portfolio that worked for me and then shuffle a few other things in the team that could work for the rest of the team. So I came on board as the head of financial control. And in that role, I looked after accounting and FP&A,
Yeah.
because I had quite a strong FP&A background. So that he wasn't originally thinking that as part of the role, but that sort of gave him opportunity to put that into my team as well. And I actually think that role worked really well, having
Yeah.
those functions work closely together.
How did you go stepping into financial control after being FP&A and com finance for so long?
I wanted to do that because it was probably the area that I hadn't had as much direct experience. Obviously in my role, and FP&A always does work quite closely with financial control.
Mm.
And, in various roles, I've worked with the financial control and accounting teams, but I really wanted more hands-on experience in that space. So I was looking for that, but knew that, it's hard when you haven't had that background, and people do often tend to stick to one path, right? Like either fully commercial finance or fully a financial control. And it is hard to move from one to the other. This is where I was really lucky that, my manager at the time was willing to take that punt on me. He had a very strong financial control background and had been partner at one of
Before.
the big four. So kind of knew that if there was gaps in my skill set, he could coach me through that, given his experience too. So we were complementary in our skill set. So this is where it also depends, if you are or aren't getting a role, it's not always you personally, but a good manager will think of that skill set within the team and make sure that you've got complementary skills rather than hiring everyone who's got exactly the same skill set. So he was strong in that area. I also then hired a very good accounting manager who reported
Perfect.
into me, who had very
Yeah.
strong technical background, but an excellent communicator as well. And we worked well together. And so I guess, what I brought in there was leadership and an understanding of the business that I could really share with the accounting team and get them to not work in silo, but really
Mm.
understand the work they're doing and how that impacts the rest of the finance team and the business, and create that harmony between accounting and FP&A, where in some businesses they can almost be butting heads. Whereas I had
Mm.
accounting manager and my FP&A manager got along
Okay.
brilliantly and would
Yeah.
consult each other on decisions and inform each other where they needed to. So it actually worked really well. And then obviously, I grew my skill set over time, but I didn't need to be the technical expert at that stage, right? There were accountants
Yeah.
in my team who had much stronger understanding of the technical aspects of the job than I could,
Mm.
but I was playing a leadership role, which is a different skill set. I think that sometimes where people get a bit worried about taking that next step is, oh, I haven't done that from a technical perspective. But you don't have to. You're bringing a different skill set. If you know how to hire good people and you know the right questions to ask, then it doesn't matter that you don't have the background. Let the people do the jobs. They're the experts in it, and
Mm.
then they're just coming to you when they need to raise an issue or they need obstacles removed or they need support on something. And that's where I could step in and help the team. I mean, if you think of any CEO, no matter what path they've come from, whether it's through a sales director path or a CFO, they're never going to have had experience managing every single function. There'll be lots of
Mm.
areas that they're not technical experts in. But what they're good at is bringing the right people together, hiring the right people for the right roles, solving problems, removing obstacles. Like that's a leadership role. So I think you've got to think, it's a different skill set being a leader to being able to do everyone's roles in the team. You don't need to be able to do everyone's roles in the team.
And so did you take mat leave in that role, or was it in a prior role?
No, I had at Lion, I took mat leave. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, right. So how did you approach that? Was it something do you think impacted your trajectory there or your visibility? Because I know it's a constant challenge to make sure that they don't have to choose between family life and have a career. So it'd be good to understand your process there.
Yeah. I mean, I was very lucky that Lion was great to me during maternity leave, but I've heard lots of stories of companies that are not. So, yeah, I fell pregnant with my son while I was at Lion. I was in
Mm.
FP&A role at the time, told my manager that. He was very supportive and gave me the flexibility to attend the appointments and all those things because there were also moments, I think I told him quite early, I was probably about 10
Mm.
weeks pregnant because
Oh, wow.
there were times when I'd come into work and I just needed to sit in the meeting room with my head on a table because I felt so
Mm.
sick in the mornings. So it is really hard when you're trying to, keep it on the down low, but that's probably the time that women feel the absolute worst. So I was pretty open with him from the start. And then with that, he was very accommodating for me, and told my team. And again, they were excellent in just helping to pick up, where they needed to. I left and I planned to take 12 months maternity leave. My son was born just before COVID. So I had him and then we went into COVID lockdown and that added a whole other layer. So when you're
Yep.
in isolation at home with a newborn baby, yeah, that was really tough. And
Yeah.
I then called my leader and said, look, I'm not ready to come back full time, but I'm just losing my mind, not
Mm.
having a mental stimulation. So is there anything I could sort of do in the meantime? Again, he was great and found an opportunity for me to work on a project 2 days a week from home. Obviously, we was lockdown stage and yeah, be able to use my skill set, reconnect with the workplace. And I went back at about 9 months doing that. And then I worked with him on a plan of how to slowly increase my days to get back into the head of FP&A role. So I went from 2 to 3 days to 4 days and then eventually back to 5 days when I was ready. That was actually a dream transition back.
Yeah.
I had
Sounds
the support
great.
in leaving, I had the support in coming back. He created something for me to keep me engaged in the workplace, but I know that's not everyone's experience. It can be really hard for women coming back wanting to do those, your brain still works. You don't want to do a
Mm.
more junior role. You still want to be
Mm.
challenged, but sometimes it's having that flexibility, particularly when you're first coming back, is really important. And again, I remember that experience. And so when I've worked with team members, and I had two at Target who returned from mat leave while I was leading the team. One spoke to, so she was on mat leave when I joined, and I spoke to her. And initially, she was thinking of coming back full time immediately. I actually talked her out of it because I said, I think it's a really important time to make sure that the transition works for you and your family. because it's for the woman returning, but the baby, the partner, all of it, it's a big transition coming back to work. So she did a similar thing to what I did in the end, in, starting with a few days a week and slowly ramping it up. And then I had another employee who I hired who had been on mat leave, was looking to come back, wanted a manager level role because she'd been operating at that level, but her, she wasn't able to find something that was at that level that would accommodate part-time. But I knew her part-time was going to be, 10 times better than some people's sometimes. So she came back into the team and 4 days a week and was amazing at still being able to lead that team. And we had a strong team under her who could manage on their own with my support in the days that she wasn't there. So there's options if people are open to it. But it can be really challenging if your workplace isn't open to that.
And it's great to see that you've passed that kind of down the chain. So your own experience being so positive, then you've passed that on, because I'm sure they'll probably do the same next time they're in that same position.
Yeah, you have to, right? Like we have to do better. We have to create these opportunities and look for flexibility, and I'm talking about this from a woman's perspective because that's my experience, but there's lots of dads who, first time dads want to be around for their kids or participate in the care or even go down to part-time hours to be able to support the family as well. And often it is, two partners that are trying to manage through this career transition. So it's important that we support from both sides and allow that flexibility and
Yeah,
just think differently about how
for
you can
sure.
structure roles.
Yeah. There's so many businesses doing it now and being really creative with it as well. So like taking half pay for an extended period from both sides. So it's getting a lot better, which is good to see.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
and so then you had your first CFO role with Buzz. What was that like stepping back? Because they're obviously still a big business, but not at the same scale as Bega, Lion, Mondelez. So how was that stepping into the first CFO role, but then also a slightly smaller business too?
Yeah, so Buzz was a step change because yes, I stepped into a CFO role, but they're a private business. So first private business I'd really worked.
Mm,
All of the others had been listed, ASX listed or globally, wherever the base was.
mm,
Where Buzz was privately run, and it was three owners and two still had involvement in the business. There's a CEO that was running the day-to-day operations, but the founders were still involved from a strategic perspective and some of the business development perspective, that kind of thing. And so it was a different experience because, and I guess there's pros and cons to it, right? Because I loved you had more autonomy. You could be more creative in your solutions. The CEO and the founders were much more open to new ideas, and not even open, but it ends with them. They're the decision makers. Sometimes in the corporates, even with a really supportive CEO, it needs to go through regional team, global teams, get the right approvals processes because corporates have to operate in a structured way. Whereas with this, it would an opportunity would come up, we'd almost say yes and then work out how to do it later. So it was a kind of really different way of approaching it, a bit more risk taking, I guess. And so from a CFO perspective, you had to be open to that, be very agile because things were changing rapidly. But also work out how to mitigate risk without stopping opportunity, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Risk mitigation is a huge part of a CFO role, but you don't want to be at the cost of innovation and being able to take opportunities. So there was a bit of change in mindset and approach to what I was used to, for sure. In saying that, and the downside to it, when I got a question that was a bit of a tricky one, if that happened at Target or Lion, I could call up the corporate team that had experts in tax and accounting, and someone would have been through that situation before and could have given you some advice on it. Whereas with this, it stopped at me. So when I got the questions, I had to use my network, look for advisors, really be more resourceful, even more resourceful than I had in the past, because I didn't have that corporate structure to rely on. And it also meant that there's not always the process and structure that there is at corporate where you can pick up something that's been done before and implement it. It's really a new opportunity, means starting something from scratch. So, there's good and bad of both. I really enjoyed that role because it just did give me a complete breadth of experience when you're managing an entire finance function and you're kind of it. I mean, obviously, I had a great team underneath that were supporting all of that, but very different to being in the corporate structure. And I liked working directly with the founders because they just have a different, a different mindset. They're always looking for opportunity. They just think differently. They think big and they move at a pace that was just different to what I'd come across in corporates.
Do you think that that experience prompted the thought of starting your own business? Was
Yeah.
it that? Yeah.
Yes, it did. Just, I guess, from two sides, in that, these guys had built up this business. Buzz is not a new business, and they are, a really a decent sized business, not as big as the global corporates, but they're a big-ish business. And they had built that from scratch over the last 20 years. So, seeing that they just had come up with the idea and built it, saying yes to opportunity, I could see that it's possible, I guess.
Mm.
In the other aspect, I really enjoyed working with the founders, which is something that I hadn't really done before. And so I wanted more of that in what I was doing. And so I guess all of those things together, also thinking about my own, how it fits into my own work-life balance from a flexibility perspective. My son was started school this year. So, I was also thinking ahead to that I wanted a bit more to be around for some of the school pickups and drop-offs and all of those kind of things. So that's how I kind of formulated the idea for the current business that I'm running.
And how early on before you launched were you starting to play around with it, or doing work after hours or on the weekends just to get your ducks in a row?
I think from the idea through to when I left my job and started the business was probably about, I say 6 months, although I probably had some sort of idea in my head for like several years. Thinking it's, maybe. But when I got sort of serious about investigating it, it was probably 6 months I started talking to people just to test out the idea. And getting some feedback on it. Then a few months in, I did set up the business structure, registered company, all of that kind of stuff. So it was sort of ready from the back end. I had, worked out what the startup costs would be, what a potential plan would look like, started saving some money. So I had a runway, didn't take off. So it was probably, yeah, 6 months of planning that before I made the leap. And I did, there's two ways to do it. I guess you can start up on the side and if it starts working, eventually transition across. But I went cold turkey. And I guess reason for that, one, my job at Buzz as a CFO, it's full time. It's not, could have gone down to part time. It is a lot. I'm tired at the end of the day. I didn't have the brain space to be starting up another business. And also just, from a finance perspective, and this is maybe a lot of corporate roles too, you can't really be consulting to another business when you're working in one. So,
Yep.
it can, if anyone is considering that, it's worth in checking
Yeah.
your employment contract too, because it can't be a breach of your contract if you're providing similar services to another business. So for me, it was sort of no option. I had to be all in or not. And so, yeah, with the careful planning, some saving for financial backing, obviously talking to my husband too and making sure that we're on board as a family, I decided to make the leap and, yeah, left Buzz and business.
But for that process of starting it, if you were going to do it all over again, would you do it any differently?
You know what? I actually don't think so. I did spend time testing it out to make sure I had an idea that was
Mm.
worth doing. I do
Mm.
feel some people just jump into business without sort of testing out the market and then realize it doesn't work. So it is worth doing that research beforehand. And then the planning to be able to do it because it can
Mm.
be, and depending on your business, I mean, I still had some costs that I needed to put into the business to start with, but my business isn't heavy on the startup costs. Some are, particularly if you're developing a product, something like that. So you do want to know what your spend is going to be. And no matter what, I feel like even when you budget, you've got to be adding, 20, 30% to
Yeah.
that as buffer because there are things you just don't know until you're in it. So there was areas I didn't plan to spend in and I did because I just didn't know any better. So maybe, yes, there's some things I could tighten up there. But in terms of approach, for me, it was the right way to go about it. Now, it will very much depend on people's financial situation, time that they can commit to it, all of those different things. But yeah, with careful planning, I don't think I'd do anything too differently.
Because the fractional CFO or virtual CFO space is very popular, and I speak to heaps of people that are considering the same. And
Mm,
because they're all very financially savvy, right? But they're not necessarily have been working in the sales or the BD component.
yes.
What have you been experiencing similar challenges or any recommendations or advice you'd give to someone considering that step?
Yeah, so this was probably my biggest challenge coming into owning my own business. I had everything set up in the back end, operations, technology, had my budget set, all of that ready to go, and then suddenly realized I have to go get clients. A lot of businesses are the other way around. They're actually good at selling and they've done nothing to set up the back end. So yeah, it was a challenge, right? I'm a CFO, I'm a finance professional. I've never done sales in my life. Usually if we were missing revenue targets, I'd just be on the sales director back about how they could make more sales. I'm not thinking that there's actually work involved in doing that. So it was a huge learning for me, a bit of trial and error, but also getting some coaching around it. So I early on worked with a business coach who just helped me from a marketing perspective too, because there's building a brand from scratch is hard work when people don't know you, they don't know the service. So I had to sort of build that presence and understand the brand. And then moving into the sales process to be able to clearly articulate the value that I give and attract leads in, and then be able to talk to them and help them realize the value that I can provide for their business. And so now I'm working with a sales coach to help me on that, because it is a skill and you do need to be strategic about it. I think that was one of the biggest learnings for me. I thought I could just, have a few conversations and it would all work, but there is strategy behind it. And particularly if you want to be growing your business. So, if anyone's thinking of that, I think the biggest tip is you have to be willing to put yourself out of your comfort zone. This is generally not natural for us as finance people to be doing that sales work and marketing yourself, but no one knows about you. Don't put yourself out there. And that is, I've attended countless networking events. I go to something every single week that's some sort of networking event. Social media I've built up over time, and that's getting your face on social media, which is, I know, scary for a lot of people. And it was for me years ago. And I know, Tom, we've had this conversation about both of us, how we've built up social media presence. But, the first time you put yourself out there, it's really scary. But the weird thing is no one actually cares as much as you do. I've had so much support for it rather than the judgment that I thought I was going. But you do have to be willing to put yourself out there and have those conversations and pick up the phone and have a sales call, turn up to events where you don't know anyone. It's not comfortable. And it gets easier as you do it. But if you are just sitting back waiting for people to come to you and you're sitting behind the screen, not getting out from behind your desk, it's not going to happen. It's just, you're not. You might get a couple of referrals come through your network because people know your work, but it will dry up very quickly.
Yeah. And so how's business going? Where do you see the company, your role over the next few years?
Yeah, look, I have ambition to grow Olive Business Partners into a virtual CFO firm. I've now got some CFOs on board that are starting to take on some client work too. So I do want to grow the business. My vision for Olive was to have, we're talking about that structure of particularly around maternity leave or people in general just wanting more flexibility around what they do, how they work and where they work. And so Olive is kind of creating that structure for businesses who want CFO level expertise, but don't want a full-time or can't afford a full-time CFO in their business, but still need that strategic direction from an expert to help them. So this gives them the flexibility to work with someone without locking in a fixed cost. Also for finance professionals who want to do this type of work, have flexibility, work from home where they need to, but do challenging work and do that senior level work, strategic work. It gives them an opportunity to do that too. So I really wanted to create, that new business structure and be challenging those sort of old ways of working. So yeah, vision for me is to continue to grow out the business, giving small business owners the expertise that they need to grow their business and giving more opportunity to those finance professionals who are looking for that flexibility in their work.
And the good thing about it, because as you were saying before, for people that are looking to get into this space, working for someone like yourself, they can start to get that control back in their career, but not have to deal with all the sales component of setting up a business, all the risk. They can just come in and get the flexibility and the freedom to take back control, but then work with someone like yourself who's been there, done that, and can give that advice going forward.
Yeah, that's it. And the BD side isn't for everyone. Have been, as much as it's been nerve-wracking at times and uncomfortable, I've actually enjoyed the journey and the growth that's come from that. And I enjoy the business development side now. But I know it's not for everyone. And so, yeah, I still want to allow finance professionals to do that type of work. And, if the BD side isn't for them, because I feel like there's a huge talent pool out there that probably a lot of corporates are missing out on not being more flexible with some of their policies, but there has to be opportunity for them to be able to still use their skill set and experience.
Yeah, and it's probably the number one thing that I hear of for job seekers trying to get flexibility, particularly at that senior level, is
Yeah.
that they're at a point where they've given value, they're earning good money, but at that point it's more around flexibility and getting their time back. So it's a pretty unique opportunity in that. Well, before we do wrap up, if there are people that are looking to get into the fractional CFO space or are looking to engage with the fractional CFO, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So I have a careers page on my website, which will give them some really good information. There's a webinar replay on there that will
Okay.
tell them a bit more. We've talked about some of my journey today, but it will tell you a bit more about the inside of the virtual CFO firm and what's sort of involved if you are thinking about that, plus a couple of other resources on the website. So it's olivebusinesspartners.com.au/careers.
Okay, perfect. And then to get in touch with yourself directly, is there any other methods or LinkedIn or anything like that?
Yeah, happy to connect on LinkedIn. Obviously, Sarah Petty on LinkedIn, or the business page is Olive Business Partners. And feel free to connect or reach out. Would love to hear from anyone who has listened to this and is interested in the space.
Perfect. Well, I'll chuck all the links and all the details when we send out the pod. But Sarah, thanks again for your time and been really, really informative.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Tom.
All right, speak to you soon. Thanks for listening to the CFO Track. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. I'll see you next time.